Hey guys, welcome back to a new episode of Dev Drawer. Today we're going to be going over how to work with our API that we've been working on for the past few weeks. And basically we're going to add some documentation to it. Whenever you have an API, it's very important that you have documentation added to your API so that you can always reference it without having to open up Postman or something like that. In the last tutorial, we actually went over Postman, so that's what you can see on the screen right now is kind of a way that Postman displays everything, so we can access our API using Postman, using the URLs that the jQuery would use, the AJAX responses would use. So with this tutorial, we're actually going to be going over how to integrate your own documentation into it, which kind of replicates what you would see inside of Postman. But before we get too far into it, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. And if you like this video, definitely like it, leave a comment on it. I'm more than open to suggestions. So I think right now, let's go ahead and get started. So first thing that we want to do is kind of figure out how we want to go, what direction we want to go with the API documentation. Personally, I like using Swagger. If you've never heard of Swagger, there's a lot of really cool resources that you can find on it. Sometimes their documentation may be a little bit lacking, especially if you're moving from version 2 to version 3, which switches over from the Swagger calls to the OpenAPI calls. In this video, we're actually going to be using version 3, and we're going to be using those OpenAPI calls because that is the more modern version of Swagger. But whenever you're working with Swagger, it doesn't work well with PHP. So we're going to install another tool created by Zircote. I believe I pronounced that correctly. If I didn't, I apologize. But there's actually a file that you can, or something that you can get from GitHub that would allow you to take your PHP and convert those functions and methods and everything that we've created previously into the documentation that Swagger UI would use. So first thing I'm going to do is let me switch from Postman to Chrome here, and we're going to go to GitHub and download something from for PHP Swagger from Zircote. So let me go over here and let's do GitHub, and then I'm just going to search for Zircote, Z-I-R-C-O-T-E, and then Swagger PHP. And the first one that appears is the one that we want to go with. So whenever you're looking at this, it's pretty self-explanatory as to how you would get it on your website. But there's a few things that we want to do differently. Like we don't want it to be API / the actual file that the documentation is pulling. We're actually going to create a new folder called documentation, so whenever you want to reference the documentation, everything will be compiled inside of that folder. So let's go ahead and we're going to install Zircote in our main directory. So over here, I'm going to open up a new terminal window, and I'm going to make sure that we are in our live API. So let's do cd live/API, and now we're in this folder right here. So let me go ahead and minimize everything else so it's less confusing. So let's take all this. Alright, so now we're inside of our API folder. What we want to do is take this composer requirement, and we're going to paste that in here, and we're not going to add it to a folder right now. We're actually going to use this part of it inside of our main API folder, and then we will take the actual Swagger itself and throw it inside the documentation folder. So for right now, let's just go ahead and run this code that you can pull from the composer or the GitHub for this framework. So while we're waiting on it to pull over, let's kind of recap what we've done previously. So we ended up creating a CRUD system that uses an API rather than the standard PHP CRUD operations that we did in my first few videos. This uses the API to do your create, to read, to do the single, to do your updates as well as your deletes. And it makes it a lot easier to manage your code because on the front end you don't have to use PHP. Like in this project, we're not actually using PHP. Everything is being done through these pages and this JavaScript. So if you want to reference how we did this, there's a few videos that we've done previously where we actually used Sammy.js to create this application. And the reason that we're doing it this way is because in the future, if we ever wanted to build a web app, we could take this code and just essentially copy it into something like Cordova and build out a web app without having to worry about the PHP conversions, because all the PHP is handled through the API, which will be on its own separate server. Okay, so we have the API, and we have our vendor, we have Zircote, and then we have the PHP Swagger PHP installed here. So now what we want to do is, if you read down a little bit further, it'll tell you what you can do with all of your, basically you add this to your methods, your controllers, however you want to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our controllers to the only page that we have, which is pages.php, which we're already on. Let me minimize this a little bit so you can see better. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we're going to copy over this, and we're just going to paste it in there. This is essentially going to tell the API what your version is, what the name of it is. There's a lot of other stuff that you can add here, and if you read through OpenAPI, which is what this stands for, OA, OpenAPI, you can get more of the titles, information variables that you can use, so you can push over support links, contact information, about, stuff like that. You can add that to your API. So I'm going to change this, and since this is our live server, we're going to say API live test, and we're just going to make it version 1.0. And then we're going to grab this, and we're going to throw it on top of our read function. So our read is a get. Whenever you're using an API, you have different post types that you can send over, or different types that you can send over. You have get, put, post, and delete. They're all kind of similar. However, they do different things. So this get doesn't expect any variables to be passed with it, or it would be using something inside of the URL, which would be like question mark, this variable equals this. You can use get for that. Post is whenever you post something from a form. Put is whenever you are updating something. So for example, we're going to show you how to do the update in the I think the next tutorial, and that's going to be where it'll the put just updates with something that already exists, and then delete is self-explanatory. So for right now, let's just format this the way that we want it, and I'm going to, where's this at? Look at my previous documentation just to make sure I'm following it correctly. Good. Okay. All right. Let's clean this up a little bit so it's a little bit easier for you guys to read at home, and we're just going to make it a little bit more simple to read. One thing that you can notice is your responses that you're able to get. You have different kind of responses that you need to pass. Like for example, this one is going to have a response of 200, which that essentially means it's a success. And then you can also have another response that's 404, which essentially means that it doesn't exist. So right now, that's going to be the two responses that we send back. So we have a success response and a not found response. We're going to change this path because we're not using API resources. We're actually going to change this to the API of this read function. So for our case, it's API/v1/pages and then read. And then we're also going to tag it so that it groups them together on the actual documentation. We're going to tag it. So tags equals pages. And this is essentially going to tell it that it needs to group all of these underneath pages, and then you would change that for the different type of controller that you have. And I think, nope, I need to do this. So this needs to be a star and a space. Let me turn off word wrapping for a second. There we go. Let's take that and push it down, and then this goes like this. Okay, then we're going to put a comma, and let's just copy this one again. I copied the wrong one because it didn't have the OA response. So then we're going to do 404, and again put it as not found. There we go. And that should be it for our read functionality. And I'll show you how to actually view this. If we go to it right now, there's not going to be anything there because we don't have our documentation, because there's another step that you need to do. Whenever you are generating this JSON file, or right now it's XAML, but we're going to be running it in the JSON format. So whenever you're creating that format or this file, it's basically going to read inside of our controllers, and then it's going to push that content as a JSON file, which then the Swagger UI would use. So let me go ahead and copy this, and then inside of our API we're going to create a new folder called documentation, and then inside of that documentation folder we're going to create a file called api.php, which is essentially going to turn into our JSON file. So let's do new file api.json, or not api.json, api.php, because it's going to convert automatically to a JSON file for us. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Okay, so typically they want you to run XAML. XAML doesn't really work well on my server. I don't know if it's a setting that I need to turn on. I've just never really used XAML before, so if you have any experience with XAML, this might be a different situation for you. But for me, I actually want to run it as a JSON file, so I'm going to change this from XAML to JSON. And then here, instead of to YAML, I'm going to do to JSON. And then up here, this is where you're telling it that you want to scan for your methods, your controllers, your functions. So we're going to copy, let me see, in one of our, let's say our read page. I always use the document root just because it's easier to point it to exactly where I want it to go. So we're going to take this, we're just going to delete this, and then we're going to put in /API/controllers, because that is where our functions and our methods and classes and everything reside right here. So now if we go to our API/documentation/API, then it should produce the JSON file that we want. So let me make sure that y'all can see the screen. Alright, so let's go over here and we're going to do /API/documentation, and oh, I forgot to do this same thing over here. So the vendor auto reload is inside of the root as well. So let's just go ahead and copy this over and save this. Vendor, so API, let me see where it's going. So it's in live vendor autoload.php. Live API. Why is it no? There we go. Live API. There we go. Alright, so now this is it's actually JSON code, and it has all the information. So the API live test 1.0, and then it grabs the read, tags it as pages, and then operation ID equals read, and then the responses. So this is essentially producing the JSON code that our Swagger UI is going to use. Okay, now that we've installed everything, we're going to switch over to the Swagger part of it. So I'm going to go over here to just Google Swagger, and we're going to be using the Swagger UI. However, we're only going to be using the distribution folder from Swagger UI. So let's go over here to download Swagger UI, and then we're just going to open up the GitHub. And essentially what we're going to do is just copy this, and then we're going to run that in our terminal underneath the API folder, because we want the entire thing to be downloaded. So let me minimize these so they're kind of closed. Inside of the API folder, we're just going to download it in here, and then we're going to make a copy of the distribution folder and label it as Swagger inside of our documentation. So let's go here to git clone, and then we're going to paste in that URL, and it's going to be cloning Swagger UI into this folder here. So let's just give it a second to pass through it. And while we're waiting, Swagger also has an online version of it. So let me open up that real quick. Let's go back a few to here. If we go to their homepage, you have your Swagger editor. And what's pretty cool about this is you can actually see the Swagger JSON as it's created and then what it creates on this side of it. There we go. Resize it a little bit so you can see better. But basically, this is the JSON script that we're going to be dynamically generating from our methods and controllers and all this kind of stuff in order to get these links. And then we're going to have a page very similar to this one without all the JSON code on it. So now that it's downloaded, let's the next thing we need to do is move the distribution package, which would be this folder here. We want to move it to our documentation. So we're going to use the command line for that. And let's do mv, and I think it's, let's see, we're currently in the API folder, API, so let's do that. And no, let's switch over to the Swagger folder. So let's do cd Swagger UI, not CS, cd Swagger UI, and then we're going to do move, and then we're going to point it back one. So it references the distribution folder inside of this. I think we need that. So let's try to do it this way. Move distribution folder to whatever path you want it to go to. For us, it's going to be / documentation, and then we're going to call it Swagger. Let's see if that runs. Failed. Positional parameter cannot be found. Hold on, let me see what it did. Move distribution. Swagger. Actually, I think we can just do it this way. Documentation, Swagger. Okay, there we go. I just had to, I don't know why, I was using Composer type here. So let's go here. Now we have our Swagger folder, which has all of the files that we want it to have in it, which has the JavaScript, the CSS for Swagger. So if we open up our browser again, let me make sure that y'all can see that window. Okay. Then we're going to go over here to Swagger index.html. It has a demo, basically what you saw on the demo for the actual Swagger website. That is what you're seeing here. So you can reference it in your code. You can always go back to see how they're doing it on their side of it as well. So what we want to do right now is take this index.html, and we're just going to highlight all of this. Let me close out the terminal. We're going to copy this, get out of the Swagger folder, go straight into our documentation, and we're going to do new file, and we're going to call it index.php. And then we're just going to paste that in here. So if you look through this, it's essentially just formatting how the look of the page is going to be. So we're going to save that, and we're going to go back one to the documentation. And right now it's blank because we haven't set up the variable to point to where we need it to go. So on our, let me pull it up here. On ours, we're actually going to type in the full URL, which whenever you actually publish this live, it would be the full URL of your API. So we're going to come over here, and we're going to type in HTTP, and we're going to grab this from here to paste in here. I think I can copy the HTTP. Okay, there we go. So we got the live API.local/API, and then we're going to do /documentation/API.php. And that should produce us with that simplistic result that we have in our pages where it's showing just this one section. Let's go over here and refresh. And where am I not pointing it to? Let me see. Inspect console. Okay, so it's not pointing to the, oh, okay. So it's got to do, we're currently in the documentation folder. We need it to go into Swagger. So I believe the only thing we need to do here is just type in Swagger / Let's go ahead and copy and paste that there. Same thing with our style sheet, paste that there. And our favicons, we don't really need them for this tutorial, but let's just go ahead and put them in there anyway. And then everything else should be correct. So let's do a refresh. There we go. Alright, so that doesn't matter for us. And you may see the invalid call here. Right now we are not too worried about this part because the code works. So if we run this and we try it out, it should pull back all of the pages. The same thing that we would have saw in our Postman, which I can show you by switching back to Postman. So we have home, about us, contact us, services, and that's because it's hitting the same URL that our documentation is now hitting. So let's get rid of Postman again. And what's cool about this is that you can control, obviously you see it has API live test version 1, it's getting this page, and they're going to be grouped together by pages. So let's say if we wanted to go over here to this, and I know this isn't going to be the correct way to do it, I'm just going to show you real simple how it is to add different functionality into it. So we're going to do, instead of doing read, we're going to do single, and it's going to be tagged under pages. And if we save it and then refresh, now we have a single, which is currently a get value, but we're not going to do get, it's going to be a post. So for right now, I think I'm going to end this video here. I just wanted to show you how to get Swagger installed and how to actually kind of go through their documentation and how to have a visual version of your API that you can reference and go back to. In the next video, I want to kind of show you how to build this API documentation using the functions that we have and show you what type of different information you need to put into your, there's different things that you need to do. Like for example, we're gathering a slug here. We need to be able to pass that slug to the response in order to be able to have it where you can type it in over here and then try it out. This one is just a simple get one that if you try it out, it just goes out there and grabs this, which there is no functionality that's being passed to it. In our JavaScript that is pulling these APIs, we do have some functionality that's being passed to the other ones. So I think in the next video, I'm going to get into that. But I think it's a lot to take in whenever you're starting to get started with Swagger. I know it was a lot for me because their documentation is kind of iffy, and I kind of started researching it and getting into it whenever they were switching from 2.0 to 3.0, so it made it even more difficult because this entire section over here was different. It was at Swagger or SWG, and now it's at OA because they switched over to OpenAPI again. And I think that setting up these variables needs to be a tutorial all on its own because there is a lot of stuff that you can do, there's a lot of stuff that you need to do, and especially if you've ever used Swagger in the past where you had 2.0, the responses, the text that you need to put here is different. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and end it. If you like this video, stay tuned for the next version of it, which is going to be detailing how to set up these different sections so we can do our entire CRUD system through our API documentation. But for right now, if you like the video, like it, and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think of it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. My subscriber numbers are going up every day, so thank you very much for that. And I will talk to you later.